Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about something that honestly I struggle with all the time. And this is one of those throw myself under the bus episodes where I get to expose my struggles and what I do to help myself, knowing that I'm not alone. And I guess that's the beautiful thing that I have doing the work that I do, is I know I'm not alone. I know that other people think this way, and so I can be brave enough to vocalize it in a podcast episode. But it is really hard to tackle the thought or the concept to love the child that you have versus the child you wanted. Even that title is really hard to say, right? And yet so many of us who are parenting kids with mental health issues have those feelings, and those feelings do need to be validated, normalized, and explored, because you are not alone if you have had those thoughts. So we're going to get all into it today, and I hope that you find it helpful. But before we get started, a couple of announcements. The first one is I want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. And you can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That's treatmyocd.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. I am having a free series that's happening right now. So if this episode resonates with you, or this topic resonates with you, and you want to dive deeper with me on this topic, definitely sign up for my free series that is starting next week. Let me just look at yes, you will be listening to this. I'm just trying to figure out where I am and where you'll be listening to this. Today is Tuesday, July 9th, when this episode goes live, and the free series starts 2 weeks from there. So you can sign up. You can actually sign up anytime while the series is happening. So the series will start July 25th, 2024, and it will go all the way through August 2nd. And so you can register at any time during that period. And they are videos that are on demand, and so you can catch up with us that way. But it is my self-care series, self-care specifically for parents who are raising kids with anxiety or OCD, because we're not going to dive into your generic self-care. We're going to talk very specifically about compassion fatigue, the burnout of raising a child with anxiety or OCD, the overwhelm, the physical and emotional exhaustion, sometimes the lack of a support group or a support network that is helpful. We're going to talk about mindset shifts. That's a big part of what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm going to walk you through all those. A lot of times parents will sign up and register for my free classes, my free course. It's not a course, it's a series. My free series, literally every time I do it, which I think is the biggest compliment, because it tells me that there's value in this, and there's so much value that people want to take it over and over and over again. So join us. It's free. If you've joined us before, join us again. And you can register at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. Okay, so let's talk about loving the child you have versus the child you wanted. I think that a lot of times we can develop compassion fatigue, which is really just a fancy word for just being tapped out, just having no more gas in your tank to empathize or to show up for or to be present to your child's struggles. And it manifests in different ways for each one of us as far as how that shows up. It might mean that you're more irritable. It might mean that you're more snappy. It might mean that you're more sad. It might mean more that you're hopeless and you are depressed yourself. It might mean that you are disconnected. It might mean that you are ambivalent, tapped out, indifferent, numb. all of those things can be caused by the exact same stuff. It just shows up differently for each one of us. We all handle our stressors in different ways, and it comes out of us in different ways. So clue into how it shows up for you. And we do go into detail about this in the free series. I help you kind of map out what are your mental, physical triggers, and what are the signs, the early warning signs that say you're not doing okay. And they are there. Sometimes we are just not clued in to notice them, or we ignore them because we think we're not the front burner issue, our children are. But if we don't work on our own mindset, if we don't work on how we're showing up to this struggle, we're not doing the thing that we actually have 100% control over. And I say this a lot. We don't have full control over our child's journey with anxiety or OCD, which is frustrating. But we do have complete control over how we interact with this journey. And that's really a message that I'm always trying to convey to parents is what are the things that we can control? What are the things that we can do? And hands down, the most effective thing we can do is work on how we are approaching our children's anxiety or OCD. They have to pick up the baton and do their own work, but there's so much work that we can do on our own separate from them. So even if you have a child who is unwilling or unable to work on their anxiety or OCD, because I have a lot of parents who throw their hands up in the air and they're like, they're not willing to work on it, so I can't be part of your AT parenting community, or I can't listen to your stuff anymore because we'll just have to come back and revisit it when they're willing and able to work on it. And I'm always like, no. I mean, I don't say that. I respect anybody's decision, but I'm always like, that's the time where you need it the most, where you're going to feel the most burnt out and you're going to want the most support. So part of the struggle and part of what we're going to go into today is our own mindset and our battles, our inner demons with how we handle our own self-talk. And I know for a lot of us, there's a grief component. There's a grief of, this isn't how I envisioned parenting. This isn't how I envisioned my children. Most of us had an idea or a concept or an image of what parenting would look like, of what our children would look like, of what our family would look like. And when it doesn't match up in whatever direction, and it could be in so many different directions, we may have envisioned our marriage in a different way. We might have envisioned having more boys or having more girls, right? So this is not anxiety or OCD specific, but we are going to get very specific in a minute. It is about grieving the fantasy of what we had versus the reality of what we have. And honestly, I feel like that's a life skill that we have to do in so many areas. The fantasy of what life would look like at 20 and 30 and 40, the fantasy of what our house would look like, the fantasy of what our job would look like, the fantasy of, like I said, our marriage would look like, and the fantasy of what our children would look like at different stages in their development as well. But there's this extra layer that I think is really hard when your child has medical and or mental health issues, because that's not normally part of the equation that we have built into our expectations typically. And so there is a grieving process. I actually did a whole podcast episode on the grieving process when your child gets a diagnosis or when you realize they have anxiety or OCD. And that is actually episode 189. It's called Helping Parents Handle the Grief That Comes with an Anxiety or OCD Diagnosis. And I go in depth in that episode on the importance of grieving and not, processing those feelings, and also the importance of moving forward after that. People get stuck in the grief process or people skip it. And I feel like it's important to find that sweet spot in the middle. So feel free to listen to that episode after this one. If you are searching for my episodes, I always tell you this, go to my website at atparentingsurvival.com, scroll all the way to the bottom. I have a search button, type in a keyword and it will pop up. So a lot of times if you type in the number that I give you, that will pop up. So it's episode 189. So if you type in 189 in the search button, I'm going to see if that actually works. Let's do it together. Yeah, that worked. Okay, so then when I give you a number, just type in the number under the search button and that will pop up. So it also pops up some weird stuff like about Natasha. That's weird. I don't know why that page pulls up under that number, but whatever. Check that out. The other podcast episode I want to recommend after listening to this one, if this episode or this topic resonates with you, is compassion fatigue. And I talk more in general terms about what to do when you have compassion fatigue. I normalize it. It happens to all of us. If you are human and you have a pulse and you're dealing with something really hard, you might get compassion fatigue, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not a kind-hearted, connected, wonderful parent. It means you've got a lot on your plate. That's episode 213. So maybe write those down if you want more information on these kind of topics, and those could be your next two to listen to. So 213, compassion fatigue. I don't know what that episode is called, but I can go to my handy dandy search button and tell you, because you can also just check the title of it. When you hit compassion fatigue with your child's anxiety or OCD. Well, that's a really creative title. Yeah. So check that out. But today I want to specifically talk about the ongoing battle. And I don't know if you feel this way, but I have been really struggling with this lately in particular. I feel like it comes and goes. Do you feel that way? It's like sometimes you have a really good handle and you're doing well, and then other times you're just like, why? Like, why are you not this way? And that comparison is the first thing that I want you to pay attention to, because you may not even know that you're doing this. But when you start to get overwhelmed, which can show up differently for each one of us, like you get angry at your child, or you get really sad for them, or you get really anxious with them. What thoughts are you bringing to the table? What are your thoughts when you're starting to feel those things? I noticed for me that they are different. There are different feelings for different kids of mine. Like, it elicits a different feeling. And I wonder if you have multiple kids with multiple struggles, and it doesn't even have to be anxiety or OCD per se, but it might trigger different things for you. And so it might be that you have this image of what your kids should be like, or you might be comparing them to how other kids are, like your friends' kids or your family's kids. And I wish that you could be like this person. You may not say it, but you're thinking it. And sometimes when we're thinking those things, it drives more fuel to the fire. I know for me, one of the things I'm struggling with right now is you're at this age, and for some reason, currently this is an issue. I'm like, you're at this age, but you're doing these things, and you shouldn't be doing these things or struggling with these things because you're now this age, and getting more frustrated, feeling more anxious about the future, feeling more ownership and responsibility and pressure to fix this as soon as I possibly can, because the time is ticking now. That drives my energy and how I show up for the problem in a really negative way. No doubt, right? Obviously. But that's for me. Think about it for you. And it may not always be that way. It may not be that you're showing up to your child's struggles because you're having a hard time loving the child you have versus the child you wanted. It can show up in many different ways. For me, currently, I'm struggling because I wanted it to look this way at this age, and it's looking this way. And that's why I think it happens episodically, like depending on the development or depending on where things are. Sometimes it's a bigger issue for me than other times. But when that does happen, a lot of other things happen. One, I show up with less patience. I show up with my wounds, right? Like, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. I wasn't supposed to have to deal with this at this age, my own age, right? Or things that should be better by now and they're not. Or you're not using your tools and I've done everything I can. And it triggers a whole bunch of emotions for us, which are different for each one of us. And so tune into that and pay attention to what are your thoughts when you are really struggling with your child, and what part or percentage of those thoughts are about you and the lens that you're wearing. And I talk about mindset so much because I feel like we are not in a blank slate bubble. We are coming to our children's issues with our own stuff, our own lens of what we wanted, what we wish we had, what we wished for ourselves, our own childhood, our own triggers. I talk about this all the time. I'll talk about this very in depth in the free series that you can register for at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. We'll go into this, but I feel like we are constantly trying to reconcile what we want our kids to be like versus what they are. And that can be a component for a lot of us. And a lot of us don't want to admit it. So there's this big denial of, I can't even say that out loud, Natasha. I can't even privately admit that to myself because it feels like a betrayal to my child. It feels like putting my child down. It feels cruel. But I would argue that if you don't reconcile those feelings that are there, we don't control what we think, we just control what we do with them. If you don't reconcile those feelings and the actions that you take and work to process through them so they don't remain stagnant and a barrier to you connecting with your child, it's going to impact your relationship and it's going to impact the way that you show up for your child. And I know this because it's a daily struggle for me currently to be 100% transparent and honest. And it's an example of, here's a therapist who's been in the field for over 20 years, and I know all the clinical stuff, and I help other people with it, but that doesn't mean that it is easier for me. Just because I know these things intellectually doesn't remove all the emotion from my own story and my own struggle, right? And so I bring this to you to normalize and validate that for you, that we don't get to choose how we feel, but we can choose to deny it and be like, no, that's not a good thought. I love my child. And it's not that we don't love the child that you have. It's just there's a grief there, and there can be resentment. Why aren't you the person that I wanted you to be? Why are you putting me through all these things? Intellectually, we may know they're not doing this on purpose. They're not choosing these things on purpose, but they are who they are. And being honest with yourself is the first step to say, you know what? I was listening to this podcast episode just for fun because I listened to all of Natasha's episodes because I'm such a great fan. Just kidding. And now it's starting to resonate. I didn't even think this topic was for me. But now I'm like, oh my gosh, I have those feelings sometimes. Or maybe you picked this episode because you're like, holy cow, she's going to talk about that. Because secretly I feel like I struggle. Either way, or maybe you're listening to it and you're like, I don't think I have this as bad as I thought. Natasha sounds 10 times worse. That's okay too, because we all have our seasons and we all handle these things in different ways. But after the break, I want to talk to you about what we can do about this. So the first step is definitely acknowledging and going inward and seeing, do I have some of these feelings? Are they there? And after the break, I want to talk about what do we do with them? Because I always like my podcast to be concrete, and I want you to have some concrete takeaways that you can actually start doing to help these situations. So we'll talk about that right after this break. It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
there's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers. And so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it. So it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com. Welcome back. So in the first half, we talked about really being honest with yourself and seeing if you have some of those struggles with loving the child you have versus the child you want, and having that grief and having that push and pull when you are dealing with your child's struggles. And I want to start talking about what do we do with that, because I do believe that we are always in growth and that we stop growing and learning when we die. And we are growing and learning all the way up until death, in my opinion. And I love that. I love that view because I'm a constant, perpetual student of myself. There's so much that I learn through my emotions and my struggles, and so much that I learn about myself, like when I travel or when I'm dealing with good news or bad news or a new experience. It's constant learning about who I am and evolving into who I want to be. Never getting that perfection, but evolving over time in ways that grow and make me a better person. And this is just another component of we get to have these struggles, and then what do we do with them? We're not victim to them. I'm not a victim mentality kind of person of this is horrible and this is sad, and now I've admitted that I have these feelings and now I feel bad and it is what it is and I just have to accept it. Well, I think we can move a little bit more in a different direction. So I do feel like the first step, like I said before the break, is acknowledging these really hard feelings. I think another thing that can really be helpful is expressing them to someone. And I know that can be really scary because you're I don't want to express it to the wrong person and they think I'm a horrible person, or that I don't love my child, because I do love my child. But it's hard to reconcile what you wanted versus what you have. And it's okay to feel sad for yourself. And you're going to have emotions that might make you angry at the situation. And having someone you can vent to can be really helpful. So I do have a couple of good friends that I vent to, and they're safe people, thankfully. Since my husband died, he was kind of my go-to. And luckily I have found a handful of people that I can vent to and that they feel safe to me, and they know that I love my kids, but they know that I've got a plate full, and they know the difficulties, and they validate that, and it makes me feel better because I don't have to worry about how they're viewing me. If you don't have a go-to person, which I didn't before my husband died, he was it, but that came with its own struggles because, he was also a parent to this child, and he was also dealing with his own grief of what maybe he envisioned as fatherhood versus what fatherhood was. And so sometimes your partner's not the best person to vent to. Sometimes they're perfect. sometimes a therapist is a great person because they're so neutral and they're so clinical. They're like out of your world completely. So they're a really safe person. And sometimes they can reframe things for you, where they get you to look at things from a different perspective, but not in a shaming way. And that can be really helpful. So finding an outlet can be helpful. That would be the first thing. And the other thing that I've worked on, and I think everyone's different as far as what can help, I do catch these things in the moment. I try to become aware. For me right now, the main thing that I'm saying to myself, and you want to pay attention to your thoughts so that you can kind of hone in on like, what is it that you're really saying to yourself during these moments? And for me, currently, with this particular struggle, is you're this age and you shouldn't be acting this way, and you're acting this age in my negative talk in my head. And what are you saying? Are you saying you're like this, but my sister's kid is like this and she's your age? Or it may not have anything to do with age. It might just be like my sister's kid is this and you're this. Or it could even be that you're in a community like my AT parenting community where you're like, other kids are doing this and you're not doing it. You're not showing up. You're not doing exposures. You're not doing therapy. Like, you're being difficult. And so it could even be something similar to that. Like, I want a child who engages in therapy and shows up for the battle and would be like how I would be if I had a mental health struggle. And instead of the child that I have who is avoidant, oppositional, doesn't want to know, doesn't want to work on it. That's a hard kid to love versus a kid who's like, sign me up for therapy. Let me go do exposures. Let me go tell you all my problems. And so the grief could be on so many levels and so many different narratives, depending on what's going on with you. For me currently, it's about you're this age and you're doing these things, which are all related to mental health. You know, they're all related to actually lots of different mental health struggles. And so it's how do I reconcile that? And for me, it's one, noticing that I'm doing it. And so I'll get really angry at something that's happening, sometimes disproportionately so, where I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. It's so frustrating. For me, it shows up as frustration, to be totally honest. It's not sadness or depression. It's a little depression, but it's frustration. Like, I lose all compassion and I'm like, I get irritated, and I can't sit with it for a long period of time, especially dysregulation. Really, I lose patience rather quickly currently with the thoughts that are going on that are, you should be this way and you're acting this way. And we've been working on this for a really long time and I just can't. But when I notice my irritation and I am able to go inward, which is probably about 50% of the time, be honest with yourself, right? You're not going to be introspective 99.9% of the time. It's going to be maybe half, who knows, unless you're like, just some Zen mother or father. But for me, when I can catch it, I'll say, why are you so angry right now? And a lot of times it's because I'm like, he shouldn't be doing this at this time. And so when I'm saying things like, shouldn't be doing this, they shouldn't be doing this, they shouldn't be acting this way, or they should be doing this, or they should be doing that, pay attention to those kind of shoulds in your head, because it's a little red flag for the struggle of loving the child you have versus the child you want. Right? Because there's a should in there. They should be wanting to do therapy. They should be less oppositional. They should be more self-regulated. They should have better social skills. They should have less anxiety, right? Should. What's the should? Where is the parameter? Where's the goal? Who's setting these goals, right? It just is. There's no should about it. Yeah, we should, but it is. It is this way. I wish it wasn't. I wish it was this way, but it is this way. And the more we learn to just show up for what is versus what should be, the less baggage we bring to that issue. And honestly, I think this is a daily practice. This is not a one and done. This is not like I'm going to do my inner work and then I'm going to be like this Mother Teresa, who I don't think ever had kids. I'm going to just be this like beautiful, relaxed, empty space that just holds my child's struggles within my heart. Even if you hold your child's struggles too much, and so you're crying and you're anxious, that's not good either. It shows up in different ways, right? But we want to explore that. So a lot of times I will try to remind myself, and I'll do some mental work, like, this is where my child is at, and dropping the comparisons. And so some of this is like pausing in my brain and just being like, this is where they're at. And where are they at? Where is your child at right now, right? Maybe I'm at where my child is dysregulated a lot of the time for things that I perceive as minor. Maybe I'm at where my child has social skills that are younger than they should be. Maybe I'm at, my child can't connect to me as much as I wish that they can connect to. And that's where they're at. They're not doing it on purpose. It's not like they're plotting and planning at night. How can I really upset my mom? I'm going to not be up to par. No, it's just that is where they're at. Our kids don't do things to upset us in big global terms. They might do little things to upset us, but they're not like, I'm going to be this person that really frustrates my parent, and I'm going to be all the things they wish I wasn't. They don't plot and plan. They are who they are. They're trying to do their best. They're trying to be the best. And it's so hard to remember that in those harder moments when we are frustrated and dealing with the aftermath of those lack of skills or struggles or whatever it is. It's a ripple that impacts the whole family, the dynamics, your other kids if you have them, your relationships with your partners if you have one. Like, it doesn't stay in its box, and that can really create some hostility and anger. But then I go back, and I have to do this quite often. I go back and I just say, they're not doing this on purpose. And where are they at? If I'm expecting them to be fully self-regulated 100% of the time, and they are 60% regulated, whatever, then that's what I have to work with. I have to work on, okay, we are working on self-regulation. It doesn't serve me to be like, how many kids this age are having huge meltdowns at this age? That doesn't serve me or my child. And so it doesn't mean that I don't have those thoughts, but I catch them and I say, but I don't have everyone else's child. I have this one. And trust me, there are people who have this child too, right? I'm not alone. And luckily I know that because of my online community and the work that I do. I know I'm not alone. I know that you guys get this. You're not alone either. And that's partly why I'd like to share my own struggles in this podcast, is because I'm privy to knowing that I'm not alone. That's why it feels safe to share this with you. But you may not be privy to other people's stories and to know that you're not alone, that there's others of us hiding with really difficult, challenging situations at home as well. And sometimes we have to do the work to try to get through it. And that doesn't, that doesn't always help, but I think awareness is really important. The other thing that I do is I try to focus on the things that I love about this child. What are some of the quirky, funny things that I love about this child? Sometimes that's hard when you're in this state of mind. Honestly, sometimes that is hard. And what I have found is that if I force it, like, let me really think about this, or let me go spend one-on-one time with them, or do the things that they like to make our connection better, and I'm white knuckling it and I'm struggling and it's excruciating. And I'm just being honest. Sometimes it feels that way. That's not helpful, because a connection is a two-way street. And so you need to feel as connected to your child as they feel connected to you at that time. And so when you think about like, what strengths do they have, or what things do you love about them, that might be hard to come up with. And you might have to spend a few days looking and paying attention to the child to be like, oh, when they did that, that was really cute. That was really funny. And accepting who they are, developing a profile of who they are. And this is the child in front of me. And what are the skills they need for me to help them with at this moment? And that's my role. That's my goal as a coach, is these are the skills. Not, oh, I'm going to get frustrated every single time you can't go to the bathroom by yourself. You're 7 and you should be going to the bathroom by yourself. And every time you ask me to go with you, I'm just using a random example, I'm going to be resentful because you're not 4. And this is developmentally appropriate for maybe a 2 to 4-year-old. I'm just making this up, just whatever. And you're 7 and I still have to like go to the bathroom with you and hold your hand or wipe you, right? And every single time you ask me to do that, I'm going to feel really resentful because I'm comparing you. You're too old for this. Why is this still happening? And when you notice those thoughts or those feelings, and I'm just using this as an example separate from me so that we can see how this can play out in anyone's life or world, then you say to yourself, I have a child who's 7 who cannot go to the bathroom by themselves or who cannot wipe themselves. And what's my next small step to help them move to autonomy? And that's not going to be me not going to the bathroom with them at all. Or it's not going to be, well, now I'm just going to refuse to wipe them altogether. There's small steps that build to big success over time. And I think when we're comparing, we want to just shut it all down and go to the other extreme. Well, I'm not going to walk with you to this. I'm not going to wipe you. Or you can't sleep with me anymore. Or I'm not going to wipe things down for you anymore. The accommodations that we do for anxiety or OCD. And it doesn't happen overnight. But sometimes when we get frustrated and we compare them, and every time we have to do something, there's this film that comes over our eyes that compares them to something else. Kind of like when you're tracing something and there's that waxy paper and you put that over something else and then you're drawing on it. We do that with our kids. This is the ideal and this is you. And you're not fitting. When I trace this, you're not fitting into that image. And so I'm going to get frustrated and keep getting you to cram you into that image that I see so I can trace exactly what would be perfect. And that's not going to be helpful. It's so much more helpful when we embrace the fact that this is the kid I have. I have a dysregulated, quirky kid, and that's okay. And that might be a daily practice. You might have to say, I have a kid that I have to wipe, and I'm working on it. They're in therapy, and we're working on it. But I'm not going to get resentful and angry every time because this is who they are right now. And if they could do better, they would do better. If they were capable. We're going to build them to that, but it's going to take time. Ugh, I know it's so hard. I do totally get this struggle. On whatever level you are dealing with it, I get it, right? Maybe you wish that they didn't, take a break from college, or maybe you wish that they went to college, or maybe they're still living with you and they're 24 and you're like, you're supposed to be out there living your best life right now. Or maybe they're 3 and they haven't had solid food yet because they can't handle eating solids. Whatever your struggle is, I get it. I've been there for most of them. And sometimes it's just accepting our current reality while loving ourselves and being compassionate with ourselves and acknowledging that these feelings are okay to have, that they're normal, and that we just have to process through them. We're not going to get rid of them and be like, okay, I don't want these feelings anymore, and I'm never going to have these thoughts anymore. That's setting yourself up for failure because it's part of the human experience to have these thoughts and these feelings and learn and grow from them. It's a daily practice to have that feeling, have enough insight to recognize the feeling, and then to readapt and work through that feeling. That's an amazing, beautiful thing. So I hope that you found this helpful. I hope that you find my podcast helpful in general. If you are, don't forget to hit a star and rate it or leave a review. I greatly appreciate that. And if you leave a review, I will be reading it next time. I'm going to look, but I don't feel like I've gotten any reviews lately. People? I think I've been complaining about that for the last few episodes. If you have been listening to this podcast and you find it helpful, definitely leave a review. I greatly appreciate that. I will be reading it to show my gratitude. So I hope that you find the sparkle in everything you do. Hey, don't forget to join me for my free series, Self-Care for Parents Who Are Raising Kids with Anxiety or OCD. If you like this topic, it's going to be more of the same. We go deeper into it, and I think it could be really helpful. Sign up at atparentingsurvivalseries.com and find the sparkle in everything you do, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.